Hello Everspacians, and welcome to my thought exercise on spaceflight movement in arcade shooters. I wanted to first break down different movement types that different flight games use. There is a very physics-based simulation, and then there is the more arcadey simulation. In space games, we specifically refer to that as the 6 degrees of freedom, because you can rotate an axis on anywhere you want at any given time. Up, down, left, right, pitch, yaw, rotation, roll. So let's look at normal physics-based simulations. These are commonly used in space games: Star Citizen, Elite Dangerous. There's probably more I'm not thinking off the top of my head. Some people call this Newtonian physics because it's trying to obey the normal laws of gravity, or at least physics that was made by Newton. There is a strong emphasis on forward thrust. In space, there's no friction, there's no air. So when you go a direction, you're just going to keep going the same direction. If you want to change the direction you face, you can change the direction you face in space, but that doesn't actually make you go that direction. You would then need to apply thrust in that direction. So the more heavy they focus on that, you get this real intense focus on forward thrust. Sometimes when you're turning with some tiny maneuvering thrusters scattered all about your ship. But at the end of the day, when you want to go somewhere, you apply forward thrust. In a 6DOF arcade game, that's not the case. It plays a lot like a first-person shooter. You can forward, backward, up, down, anywhere you want at a moment's notice. Moving left is going to generally be just as fast and smooth as moving right or moving forward. Moving backwards, a lot of times, you can just do that really fast, even though there's literally no engines on your ship that can make you move back, because the goal is not on modeling a perfect simulation. It's about being fun and giving power to the player. How this works in combat, a simulation, you're going to be going forwards all the time. There's a lot of dogfighting is going to feel more like jousts. It's going to feel like strafing runs. So you could think in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, you have the Death Star trench run. Everyone's going straight. They've got a goal. They're trying to get there. And they know that not everyone is going to be able to keep up. They know that big guns aren't going to be able to track them because they turn too slow. In a 6DOF arcade game, that doesn't really matter because everyone can do everything, because that's theoretically the more entertaining way. But what that means is that you're not going forward and backward almost ever. You're playing it like a first-person shooter. You're circle strafing. In Everspace 1, you get in the interceptor, you get in the scout. You don't need to go forwards. You can just go side to side, up and down, back to back, and then occasionally you teleport 1,000 meters away and you turn around and you shoot 30 people with 200 missiles, because why not? But there's a very different flow to the combat, a very different flow to the movement specifically that you use in the combat. Which brings us to the update that Rockfish gave us today. Level design and the flow of movement. And here they specifically call out it plays like a fast-paced action shooter. They're talking about triple jumps, rocket jumps, spinning in circles. You've got your 360 no scopes. It's just, let's be as silly and goofy as we possibly can. Sounds great, I'm in. Everspace 1 plays like a first-person shooter in my Steam library. Here we have Everspace in my favorites, and right down here, it's, lo and behold, I placed it in the shooter category because it really, to me, doesn't make sense in any other category. Everspace feels like a first-person shooter. But what does that mean for us movement-wise? So let's take a peek at control schemes. Showing my hand here a little bit. So we've got our Mouse and keyboard, very effective. Forwards, backwards, left, right, strafing, turning anywhere at any given time. Very, very good. Then we have controller. Forwards, backwards, strafing left and right. You can turn, you can pitch, you can yaw. You've got all the axes at your thumbsticks. And then in similar, you've got your stick. You've got lots of axes. If you are doing two sticks, your right stick is at movement direction. Your left stick is going to be strafe and thrust. Works great. And then if you do the HOTAS, hands-on stick and throttle, suddenly things are different. Your right stick is still going to be direction. It's going to be aiming. But now, instead of having a very nimble left-hand control scheme, it basically goes forward and it goes back. A throttle is designed for a physics-based simulator. It doesn't really mesh that well with a 6 Degree of Freedom arcade game because by natural, it doesn't really strafe. There's no left and right here. This doesn't go left and right. I could turn it sideways, but then what's the point in even using it? Like, it's dumb joke, but it makes sense. It applies. Now, this specifically is the FX56. Here we go. They have added these thumbsticks. Very convenient. They added them specifically for Elite Dangerous because people kept complaining that they were trying to crash and their systems weren't subtle enough. They needed to give a gentle nudge. So there's very gentle, smooth movements. And what that means in my case for Everspace is I can strafe with this. Right, left, I can hover up and down. So there's my up and down. I don't need to worry about control or spacebar or anything like that. So I get the full range of movement. But it's not like I'm going forward and backward a whole lot and then occasionally touching this. Everspace being a first-person style game, you spend most of your time not really going forward or backwards at all. You're moving left and right. So I have this big old chunky boy. And I'm holding it perfectly still. And I'm playing my entire game like this. Just this tiny little wiggle movement. That's how half the game plays. Now, this hardware is really good. It's high-end hardware, so it does that job perfectly. It's exquisite. No complaints. However, when we compare this, the first three options all have easy access to rotation and strafe. Everspace 1 actually has the in-cockpit model designed as dual joysticks. The HOTAS is missing the primary maneuvering element. There is no strafe on a normal HOTAS. So the side effect is that everyone trying to play on a throttle and stick is playing the least ideal version of Everspace as far as control schemes are concerned. It might feel the sweetest because everyone loves, just sticking the pedal to the metal and with that throttle going forwards real fast. It's just fun. It's just fun. A HOTAS is just fun to play with. But even if it feels the best in Everspace, I do feel like I'm at a disadvantage if I was playing literally any other control scheme. So what I want to talk about right now is ways that we can make the HOTAS feel more natural in Everspace 2. I want to come up with some ideas to make it feel better while still fully aligning with Rockfish's dev goals. of being a 6 degree of freedom game with very spastic FPS movement. And I don't want to force that to go away in any way, shape, or form. So how do we do that? How do we find ways to make a HOTAS more natural in Everspace 2? One of the worst ways to do it is making lateral strafe always matter less. So that means we can just get rid of the 6 DOF model, make it go forward and backwards. Like nobody wants that. The devs don't want that. The people that are buying that don't want that. The backers for Everspace 2 don't want that because it's a first-person shooter. I mean, if I was playing Doom and I said you couldn't step sideways, people would just throw it in the trash. So let's build on the foundation that this is a 6 DOF game where people are going to have access to strafing. But maybe not everybody. Or maybe not everybody, but to some people a lesser extent. So how do we make lateral strafe sometimes matter less? I think that's a very interesting question because we don't want to say don't use it. No, we want people to use it, but now we want to make people have an interesting gameplay decision. We want a tactical decision here instead of always just circle strafing. So we can see some basic things here. Let me just show everything. So multiple ship types. We have this in Everspace 1. If you have the gunship, you're just going to be slower. You're not realistically dodging anything. You're just going to get hit. I mean, if you get adaptive armor 3 and you've got some extra armor bonuses and you've got your front shield, you don't care if you get hit. You just laugh it off and then murder them with 5 arc reactors or something. So that's great. We can build on that. We have our different ship classes. We got our fighters, we got our sentinels, we got our bombers, all that type of thing. Different min, max speeds, boosts, accelerations, turning speeds. It all works. It all works. So there are going to be some ships that maybe one of those differences, maybe we have it so that some ships can strafe more or less than others. So if you want the fantasy of dogfighting, you're just going sideways and doing backflips and going around, like you play that ship and it's sweet. But maybe you have one that's basically it's a Corvette, or a Cadillac. It's cruising, it's built like a tank, it can go straight, but then it's not turning on a dime. It's not dodging on a dime. So that's a really interesting idea. So suddenly everyone has access to every type of fantasy they want, but some of those fantasies just feel good on a throttle. And that's a lot of what I'm pushing here is what are things that we can do to give players options that will feel good on a throttle? I think the answer basically is in the loot design. Everspace has some basic loot in it. Everspace 2, they said they basically want to be a looter shooter in space. They've pointed to Diablo straight up in the past. So I'm going to use a lot of Diablo comparisons. I love Diablo 3. I've gone up to Torment 10, 11, 12. It's a ton of fun. So if we take the idea that ships already have different stats, let's ramp that up. Let's get a little sillier with it. Let's expose these values to loot. Let's let loot modify the base stats of the ship. So a simple version of this is when you get an engine, some engines are faster than others, some engines are slower than others. Well, let's say something like an engine is faster, but it modifies your lateral movement. This is an engine that anyone can put on their ship, but there's a trade-off. Maybe it's stupidly fast. It's faster than any other engine, but if you pick it, you have to suffer some sort of penalty. These are the types of loot designs that I love, where every single decision is a trade-off. It's not, this engine is 5% faster than my ship, so I will pick it because bigger numbers are better. It's better in one way, it's worse in another way. And this happens all the time. A lot of the Everspace 1 perks and enhancements, they already value this. There's one that says you can go faster, but your lateral movement or that your inertial dampeners don't work. There's ones that are like you have a gun that can basically one-shot anything, but every time you fire it, you take damage. So we know that Rockfish already loves this, and I'm saying double down on it. Just do it all over the place. Do it in every single component. I love this stuff. But then we can go more complex with it. It's not just, plus 40% here, minus 40% there. What if we made these values dynamic? They're not always the same. Sometimes they get better depending on a situation. So here's some basic examples. We have armor coming to Everspace 2, armor components. What if you had something like the faster you're moving, maybe percentage based off of your ship, maybe it's a raw velocity value. So a ship that goes slow doesn't benefit as much as a ship that goes fast. If we have velocity as one value, but we also have horizontal thrust versus lateral thrust versus vertical thrust. If we can track those independently, what if we said something that the faster you're going forward, the less damage you take? This means that strafing doesn't actually matter. The goal of the ship wearing this armor is to just be going as fast as it can almost all the time, because even if you're not dodging the attacks, they're dealing less. It's that idea of like I'm so powerful I can just outrun bullets. That sounds sweet. Everyone, fast ships, you want to feel zippy. And I know Everspace 1 actually has an issue sometimes when you're jumping around. I mean, they even point it out here, like, we want you to do loop-de-loops in this type of stuff. And Everspace 1, one of the classic things that all new people do is they're trying to get close, they're zipping around, and then they just run into a wall and explode because collision damage. Everspace 1 has some perks that say take less collision damage. That sounds pretty cool. So we can use that even more. So the idea then becomes the faster you're moving, the less it matters if you get hit or if you hit something. To not punish the player and encourage them to just be chaotic, just go for it, pedal to the metal, that type of thing. And that can apply all over the place, but in hands-on throttle and stick, it specifically means I don't have to worry about strafing all the time. Engines that can variably decrease or increase. So the faster I'm going, the harder it becomes to strafe left and right. So there's a trade-off here. This ship is fully capable of dogfighting and circle strafing. But maybe, okay, I can go really fast, but it's one of those like emergency buttons. You punch it to go really fast, and then you're basically stuck in a straight line until you slow down. Maybe it's a flat value above 40% thrust, and suddenly you can't move. Or if it just gradually, small little tweaks. That sounds sweet. Weapons that get a boost above certain thresholds. Kind of what I'm talking about, like strafe runs or bombing runs. I'm far away from an Okar frigate. I don't want to just sit next to it and just kind of wiggle left and right out of range of its giant death bombs. I'm gonna be far away. I'm gonna punch my engines as fast as I can. Maybe I'm wearing that armor that makes it so that I don't take damage when I'm going fast. And my one goal is to just go forward as fast as I can. And once I'm hitting, 80% thrust or above, 200 miles an hour, whatever numbering system they want to use, suddenly my weapons go into overdrive. This becomes a ship that has a weapon that wants it to be running full speed at the enemy. This is less of a dance and more of a battering ram. And these are a lot of fun ideas that encourage players to try alternative options. A real fun thing about these ideas are that you can use them on any ship. You could use them on any control scheme. What they ask the player to do is think outside of their normal gameplay style. Diablo does this all the time. The illusory boots in Diablo, they make it so that enemies don't block you. There's no collision damage with enemies. and it always seems underwhelming. But then you can create a build where you pull 2,000 enemies to you and you just walk out of them. So it's a component that seems useless until you pair it with something else and you get these silly synergies. So you combine all three of this armor, engine, and weapon that I'm talking about, and you're blazing, you're blistering, landscapes are flying left and right. You're charging straight at an enemy, and you're saying, "Well, I sure hope you explode because I'm gonna go through your corpse." And that's the classic Star Wars, dogfighting where Wedge Antilles blows up a Tie Fighter and goes straight through it, and the fireball all over his engines, and it's sweet. Everyone loves sweet, and that's the goal. The goal with Everspace 2 seems to be, the rule of cool. If it's cool and it makes you feel great, do it. A classic thing that I liked in Everspace 1 and is to take the scout and apply the leech glyph, which every time you kill someone, you heal. So, seems pretty good. And then you take the ancient weapon, where every time you shoot, you get hurt. So those are pretty complementary. But the scout it's pretty weak. It's kind of a stinky ship if you're in the thick of it. If picking off one enemy is really cool. Okay, I killed this guy in one shot and I healed back up. Everything's fine. But then you get in the later stages of the game where you're dying all the time because you don't have any health and there's like 2,000 ships there. Well, suddenly, if you add in the third enhancement of stealth attack, you can go cloak permanently. It damages you, so that's bad. But now we have leech, so we can get that health back, and we can fire our infinite damage super mega death laser without breaking stealth. So you can pop stealth, take a decent amount of damage on your ship, and then just murder the entire map. And if you have like a cloak 3, you literally take out the entire map from like the single spot, and you're just laughing the entire time. You're basically invincible. Damage is insignificant. You're like, I'll just fix it in a few minutes. Like 4 shots, kill an Okar frigate, or like Mark 2, Mark 3. Like it's silly, it's broken, it's invincible, and I love it. And that's the idea that I want to encourage with these components. They're not just numerical things, they want to combine to make silly things available. Clearly, the devs want silly things to happen. They want you to feel powerful the more stuff you get, and I love it. And this is what I want. I want options that make my hands feel good, not more than just my eyes feel good as a throttle player. One thing here we're talking about, okay, this sounds broken. Well, we run into an issue where I can't strafe as good as I wanted to, and Everspace there's a lot of space junk. There's a lot of interiors that we go in and out of, asteroids. So there will be issues with this. Maybe it's a design around, or maybe that is just the issue with this engine. Here's an engine that can go 2 billion miles an hour, but by the way, if you go inside an asteroid, you might just run your face into the wall, and that's a player choice. And again, going back to those trade-offs, I want to do something sweet. What do I have to keep out for since I know suddenly I can't strafe? So I don't see an issue with that realistically, but it's a call out. It's something to think about. My last little bit here I have to talk about is internal cockpits. This is basically pointless. It's sprinkle on the top. So as a stick and throttle player, there's a few things I notice in the interior cockpit. One of them is that I can't look around the cockpit. The stick has this one value, this one hat here, and it's literally labeled the POV hat. This is a point of view hat. Almost all sticks assume that one of your hats is going to be used for looking. So if I click up, it's going to look above me, to the right of me, to the left of me. And all sorts of different games have ways to use this. In the classic X-Wing TIE Fighter, they actually have dedicated buttons on the keyboard to look in certain directions, even though it isn't even a full 3D space. But they did it because they're like, okay, it's important to be able to look around. In Everspace 1, we have the ability to hit a button and look around. But when we hit this button, suddenly we can't control the ship because we have to take our hands off of everything, and switching into free look mode turns off all interaction with the ship. It would be great to be able to just have this free look mapping hookable up to the stick. That would be great. Then I can just tap I can see who's behind me. I need to turn my head. Like I would love to play this game with a headset, a VR headset. But really, the only reason I want to play the game with a VR headset, aside from generic immersion, is I want to be able to look around my shoulder. I want to look to my left, to my right, see where people are. The biggest issue with a lot of, first-person cockpit-based games is you feel like you're stuck looking forward, when in third person on Everspace, you can see all around you. So first person, again, with that immersion, and then the stick, it feels real good, but it feels like a disadvantage. So for people who want to enthusiastically play with two stick, stick and throttle in first person mode, there's kind of that I feel like I should just play this on mouse and keyboard sometimes. So again, the cockpit is dual stick. What if we could have a throttle in there? And this is always a decision everyone has. Like Star Citizen, they are modeling their sticks on their ships after a very specific make and brand that Cytec provided, because they said they did a survey and they said this is what all of our players are using. So they want it to mimic real life. Well, I'm a throttle player. I'm probably in the minority, but it would be sweet if I had a throttle in the cockpit too. That would just, again, it would feel good. Now, if I wanted to go crazy with this, I could say, well, if you're already developing these engines that are focused on forward thrust, so we know that we're building these dynamic ship components, and we're going to be able to see the different components based on the interior of the cockpit right here. What if I change my engine to be a forward thrust based engine? In the cockpit itself, there is a throttle. And that is a really interesting idea. It's probably way outside of the devs' care or focus. It's a wish list. It's a wish farm item. Like it doesn't need to be in the game. Even people like me, I don't really care. It'd be fun. But that's a kind of one of those, if I could have anything and everything I wanted, this would be the one thing after that. That would just be really enjoyable to see. Those are my big, heavy thoughts on movement with stick and throttle, first-person based games, pilot games. What feels good, what doesn't feel good. Also, some general ideas on different types of variety of loot. Lots of different gameplay decisions and options. You can end up using these things to make very obscure builds, items that work really well in some situations and really poorly in other situations. And I think it will make Everspace to not only a better game for throttle players, but will also be a more robust loot system in general. I hope you like what I've had to say. If you do or don't, please let me know. I'm going to post this video in the Everspace General Suggestions Discord as well. And then people can hopefully tell me that I'm not wrong. I'm curious to know how many people actually play Everspace with a throttle. I know it's a Steam game. It says that most people are going to be playing on PC with mouse and keyboard. On consoles, everyone's going to be playing with a controller. But we'll see. And hopefully this is just a launching point for a more entertaining game design discussion. Thank you for listening.